medication disposal in regular trash. Medications must be disposed of properly, following guidelines for safe medication disposal and not in regular trash. In Minnesota, what is the required minimum number of hours of annual staff training in an assisted living facility? A. 4 hours. B. 8 hours. C. 12 hours. D. 16 hours. Answer: C. 12 hours. Assisted living facility staff in Minnesota must complete a minimum of 12 hours of annual training. What is the required minimum number of daily meals in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. 1 meal. B. 2 meals. C. 3 meals. D. 4 meals. Answer: C. 3 meals. Assisted living facilities in Minnesota are required to provide at least 3 meals per day to residents. In Minnesota, what is the required frequency of nursing assessments for residents in an assisted living facility? A. Every 6 months. B. Every 3 months. C. Every month. D. Every week. Answer: A. Every 6 months. Nursing assessments for residents in Minnesota assisted living facilities must be conducted at least every 6 months. Which of the following is a requirement for emergency preparedness plans in Minnesota assisted living facilities? A. Having emergency evacuation maps posted in common areas. B. Conducting monthly fire drills. C. Maintaining an emergency food supply for 72 hours. D. Providing first aid training to all residents. Answer: A. Having emergency evacuation maps posted in common areas. Emergency preparedness plans in Minnesota assisted living facilities must include posting evacuation maps in common areas to guide residents and staff in case of emergencies. What is the required minimum age for licensed assisted living directors in Minnesota? A. 18 years old. B. 21 years old. C. 25 years old. D. 30 years old. Answer: B. 21 years old. Licensed assisted living directors in Minnesota must be at least 21 years old. In Minnesota, what is the required minimum number of licensed assisted living directors on duty during business hours in an assisted living facility? A. 1 director. B. 2 directors. C. 3 directors. D. 4 directors. Answer: A. 1 director. At least 1 licensed assisted living director must be on duty during business hours in an assisted living facility in Minnesota. Which of the following is a requirement for resident contracts in Minnesota assisted living facilities? A. Prohibiting residents from leaving the facility. B. Requiring residents to sign over their financial assets. C. Clearly outlining the services provided and associated fees. D. Requiring residents to waive their rights to legal action. Answer: C. Clearly outlining the services provided and associated fees. Resident contracts in Minnesota assisted living facilities must clearly outline the services provided, associated fees, and other relevant details. What is the required minimum number of staff with first aid and CPR certification on duty at all times in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. 1 staff member. B. 2 staff members. C. 3 staff members. D. 4 staff members. Answer: B. 2 staff members. In Minnesota, at least 2 staff members must be on duty at all times with current first aid and CPR certification in an assisted living facility. What is the required minimum ratio of licensed nursing staff to residents during waking hours in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. 1:5. B. 1:7. C. 1:10. D. 1:15. Answer: C. 1:10. In Minnesota, the required minimum ratio of licensed nursing staff to residents during waking hours in an assisted living facility is 1:10. Which of the following is a requirement for resident assessments in Minnesota assisted living facilities? A. Conducting assessments only upon admission. B. Assessing residents' cognitive function only. C. Assessing residents' physical health only. D. Conducting assessments regularly and as needed. Answer: D. Conducting assessments regularly and as needed. Resident assessments in Minnesota assisted living facilities must be conducted regularly and as needed to assess both cognitive and physical health. What is the required maximum allowable number of residents per room in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. 1 resident. B. 2 residents. C. 3 residents. D. 4 residents. Answer: B. 2 residents. In Minnesota, the maximum allowable number of residents per room in an assisted living facility is 2. Which of the following is a requirement for infection control in Minnesota assisted living facilities? A. Regular hand hygiene only for staff. B. Isolating residents with infectious diseases in their rooms. C. Sterilizing all surfaces and equipment daily. D. Educating residents and staff on infection control measures. Answer: D. Educating residents and staff on infection control measures. Infection control in Minnesota assisted living facilities includes educating residents and staff on infection control measures, among other requirements. What is the required minimum amount of liability insurance coverage for an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. $100,000. B. $250,000. C. $500,000. D. $1 million. Answer: C. $500,000. In Minnesota, an assisted living facility is required to have a minimum liability insurance coverage of $500,000. Which of the following is a requirement for resident privacy in Minnesota assisted living facilities? A. Staff may enter residents' room without knocking. B. Residents must share a bathroom with at least 2 other residents. C. Residents must wear identification badges at all times. D. Residents' personal information must be kept confidential. Answer: D. Residents' personal information must be kept confidential. Resident privacy in Minnesota assisted living facilities includes maintaining confidentiality of residents' personal information. What is the required minimum square footage per resident for a single bedroom in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. 100 square feet. B. 120 square feet. C. 140 square feet. D. 160 square feet. Answer: B. 120 square feet. In Minnesota, a single bedroom in an assisted living facility must have a minimum of 120 square feet per resident. Which of the following is a requirement for medication administration in Minnesota assisted living facilities? A. All medications must be administered by a licensed nurse. B. Medication administration must be documented on a daily basis. C. Medication administration can be delegated to unlicensed staff. D. Medications must be stored in a locked cabinet in the staff office. Answer: B. Medication administration must be documented on a daily basis. Medication administration in Minnesota assisted living facilities must be documented on a daily basis. What is the required minimum number of months of experience as a direct care staff before becoming a licensed assisted living director in Minnesota? A. 3 months. B. 6 months. C. 9 months. Answer: B. 6 months. In Minnesota, a minimum of 6 months of experience as a direct care staff is required before becoming a licensed assisted living director. Which of the following is a requirement for emergency preparedness in Minnesota assisted living facilities? A. Having emergency supplies for 24 hours only. B. Not conducting emergency drills for residents. C. Keeping emergency contact information only for staff. D. Having written emergency plans and conducting drills. Answer: D. Having written emergency plans and conducting drills. Emergency preparedness in Minnesota assisted living facilities includes having written emergency plans and conducting drills for staff and residents. What is the required minimum number of staff trained in first aid and CPR on each shift in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. 1 staff member. B. 2 staff members. C. 3 staff members. D. 4 staff members. Answer is C. 3 staff members. In Minnesota, a minimum of 3 staff members trained in first aid and CPR is required on each shift in an assisted living facility. Which of the following is a requirement for food service in Minnesota assisted living facilities? A. Offering only one type of meal option. B. Providing meals only during certain hours. C. Not accommodating residents' special dietary needs. D. Following food safety and sanitation guidelines. Answer D. Following food safety and sanitation guidelines. Food service in Minnesota assisted living facilities must follow food safety and sanitation guidelines, among other requirements. What is the required maximum allowable number of residents in a Type 1 assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. 4 residents. B. 6 residents. C. 8 residents. D. 10 residents. Answer C. 8 residents. In Minnesota, a Type 1 assisted living facility is allowed to have a maximum of 8 residents. Which of the following is a requirement for resident rights in Minnesota assisted living facilities? A. Restricting residents from making phone calls. B. Allowing staff to read residents' mail. C. Limiting residents' access to visitors. D. Respecting residents' privacy and confidentiality. Answer D. Respecting residents' privacy and confidentiality. Resident rights in Minnesota assisted living facilities include respecting residents' privacy and confidentiality. What is the required frequency for fire drills in Minnesota assisted living facilities? A. Once a month. B. Once every 3 months. C. Once every 6 months. D. Once a year. Answer is C. Once every 6 months. In Minnesota, fire drills must be conducted in assisted living facilities at least once every 6 months. Which of the following is a requirement for staff training in Minnesota assisted living facilities? A. No requirement for staff training. B. Providing training only during orientation. C. Providing ongoing training and education. D. Providing training only for licensed staff. Answer is C. Providing ongoing training and education. Staff training in Minnesota assisted living facilities must include ongoing training and education for all staff, not just during orientation. What is the required minimum number of hours of continuing education for licensed assisted living directors in Minnesota? A. 6 hours per year. B. 12 hours per year. C. 18 hours per year. D. 24 hours per year. Answer D. 24 hours per year. Licensed assisted living directors in Minnesota are required to complete a minimum of 24 hours of continuing education per year. Which of the following is a requirement for resident grievances in Minnesota assisted living facilities? A. Discouraging residents from filing grievances. B. Not having a formal grievance process. C. Investigating and resolving grievances in a timely manner. D. Limiting residents' access to outside advocates. Answer C. Investigating and resolving grievances in a timely manner. In Minnesota, assisted living facilities are required to have a formal grievance process and must investigate and resolve grievances in a timely manner as part of resident rights and protections. What is the required staff-to-resident ratio during waking hours in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. 1:2. B. 1:3. C. 1:5. D. 1:10. Answer B. 1:3. In Minnesota, the minimum required staff-to-resident ratio during waking hours in an assisted living facility is 1 staff member. For every 3 residents. Which of the following is a requirement for medication management in Minnesota assisted living facilities? A. Allowing unlicensed staff to administer medications. B. Not having a written medication management plan. C. Not requiring staff training in medication administration. D. Following state regulations and guidelines for medication administration. Answer D. Following state regulations and guidelines for medication administration. Medication management in Minnesota assisted living facilities must comply with state regulations and guidelines, including proper training and qualifications for staff involved in medication administration. What is the required frequency for reassessments of resident service plans in Minnesota assisted living facilities? A. Annually. B. Biennially. C. Quarterly. D. Monthly. Answer A. Annually. In Minnesota, resident service plans must be reassessed at least annually in assisted living facilities. Which of the following is a requirement for dementia care in Minnesota assisted living facilities? A. Allowing restraints as a form of behavior management. B. Not having specialized staff training in dementia care. C. Not providing specialized activities for residents with dementia. D. Following state regulations and guidelines for dementia care. Answer D. Following state regulations and guidelines for dementia care. Dementia care in Minnesota assisted living facilities must comply with state regulations and guidelines, including proper training for staff and specialized activities for residents with dementia. What is the required minimum amount of space per resident in a resident bedroom in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. 80 square feet. B. 100 square feet. C. 120 square feet. D. 140 square feet. Answer C. 120 square feet. In Minnesota, a minimum of 120 square feet of space per resident is required in a resident bedroom in an assisted living facility. Which of the following is a requirement for emergency backup power in Minnesota assisted living facilities? A. Having backup power for common areas only. B. Not having emergency backup power. C. Having backup power for 72 hours only. D. Having backup power for at least 96 hours. Answer D. Having backup power for at least 96 hours. Emergency backup power in Minnesota assisted living facilities must be available for at least 96 hours, and must include common areas, resident areas, and other essential functions. What is the required minimum number of baths or showers per week for residents in Minnesota assisted living facilities? A. 1 bath or shower per week. B. 2 baths or showers per week. C. 3 baths or showers per week. D. 4 baths or showers per week. Answer B. 2 baths or showers per week. In Minnesota, residents in assisted living facilities must receive a minimum of 2 baths or showers per week, unless medically contraindicated. Which of the following is a requirement for resident assessments in Minnesota assisted living facilities? A. Conducting assessments only upon admission. B. Not including resident preferences and goals in assessments. C. Not involving residents or their representatives in the assessment process. D. Conducting assessments at regular intervals and involving residents or their representatives. Answer D. Conducting assessments at regular intervals and involving residents or their representatives. Resident assessments in Minnesota assisted living facilities must be conducted at regular intervals and must involve residents or their representatives, and must also include resident preferences and goals as part of the assessment process. What is the required minimum amount of lighting in common areas of an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. 5-foot candles. B. 10-foot candles. C. 15-foot candles. D. 20-foot candles. Answer is C. 15-foot candles. In Minnesota, common areas of an assisted living facility must have a minimum of 15-foot candles of lighting. Which of the following is a requirement for staff training in Minnesota assisted living facilities? A. Not providing training for staff. B. Training staff only upon hire. C. Providing ongoing training for staff. D. Providing training for staff every 3 years. Answer is C. Providing ongoing training for staff. In Minnesota, staff training in assisted living facilities must be ongoing and provided on a regular basis to ensure staff are knowledgeable and competent in their roles and responsibilities. Certainly. Here are 50 additional sample practice exam questions with answers for the Minnesota State Examination for Licensed Assisted Living Director. What is the maximum allowable number of residents in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. 10. B. 15. C. 20. D. 25. Answer D. 25. In Minnesota, the maximum allowable number of residents in an assisted living facility is 25. What is the minimum age requirement for residents in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. 55 years. B. 60 years. C. 62 years. D. 65 years. Answer A. 55 years. In Minnesota, there is no minimum age requirement for residents in an assisted living facility, but most facilities cater to residents who are at least 55 years of age. What is the maximum allowable ratio of residents to direct care staff during waking hours in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. 110. B. 115. C. 120. D. 125. Answer B. 115. In Minnesota, the maximum allowable ratio of residents to direct care staff during waking hours in an assisted living facility is 115. What is the minimum square footage requirement for resident bedrooms in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. 80 square feet. B. 100 square feet. C. 120 square feet. D. 150 square feet. Answer C. 120 square feet. In Minnesota, resident bedrooms in an assisted living facility must have a minimum square footage of 120 square feet. Which of the following is not required to be included in an assisted living facility's emergency preparedness plan in Minnesota? A. Evacuation procedures. B. Communication protocols. C. Staffing schedules. D. Emergency supplies. Answer C. Staffing schedules. Although emergency preparedness plans in Minnesota assisted living facilities must include evacuation procedures, communication protocols, and emergency supplies, staffing schedules are not specifically required to be included. Which of the following is not a requirement for employee background studies in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. Criminal background check. B. Maltreatment history check. C. Employment history verification. D. Credit history check. Answer D. Credit history check. Employee background studies in Minnesota assisted living facilities typically require a criminal background check, maltreatment history check, and employment history verification, but credit history checks are not specifically required. Which of the following is not a requirement for medication management in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. Registered nurse oversight. B. Written medication administration policies. C. Medication storage in resident bedrooms. D. Medication administration records. Answer is C. Medication storage in resident bedrooms. In Minnesota, medication storage in resident bedrooms is not allowed as a requirement for medication management in assisted living facilities. Medications must be stored in a secure and locked area. What is the required minimum amount of activity programming hours per week for residents in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. 1 hour. B. 2 hours. C. 3 hours. D. 4 hours. Answer C. 3 hours. In Minnesota, assisted living facilities are required to provide a minimum of 3 hours of activity programming per week for residents. Which of the following is a requirement for fire safety in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. Fire extinguisher in each resident bedroom. B. Monthly fire drills. C. Annual fire safety inspections. D. Resident smoking allowed in designated areas. Answer is C. Annual fire safety inspections. In Minnesota, assisted living facilities must undergo annual fire safety inspections to ensure compliance with fire safety regulations. What is the maximum allowable time for responding to a resident's emergency call in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. 5 minutes. B. 10 minutes. C. 15 minutes. D. 20 minutes. Answer A. 5 minutes. In Minnesota, assisted living facilities must respond to a resident's emergency call within a maximum allowable time of 5 minutes. What is the minimum required number of staff on duty at all times in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. 1. B. 2. C. 3. D. 4. Answer B. 2. In Minnesota, assisted living facilities must have a minimum of 2 staff members on duty at all times to ensure resident safety and care. Which of the following is not a requirement for resident rights in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. Privacy and confidentiality. B. Right to refuse medical treatment. C. Right to own personal possessions. D. Right to unrestricted visitation. Answer D. Right to unrestricted visitation. While residents in Minnesota assisted living facilities have the right to privacy, confidentiality, refuse medical treatment, and own personal possessions, visitation rights may be subject to certain restrictions or limitations for the safety and well-being of residents. What is the required frequency of resident assessments in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. Monthly. B. Quarterly. C. Annually. D. Biennially. Answer B. Quarterly. In Minnesota, assisted living facilities must conduct resident assessments at least quarterly to assess the resident's physical, cognitive, and psychosocial needs. What is the maximum allowable level of care that an assisted living facility can provide in Minnesota? A. Basic care. B. Intermediate care. C. Comprehensive care. D. Skilled nursing care. Answer is C. Comprehensive care. In Minnesota, assisted living facilities are licensed to provide comprehensive care, which includes basic care and intermediate care, but not skilled nursing care. What is the required minimum amount of general liability insurance coverage for an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. $100,000. B. $200,000. C. $300,000. D. $500,000. Answer D. $500,000. In Minnesota, assisted living facilities are required to have a minimum of $500,000 in general liability insurance coverage to protect against potential liability claims. What is the required minimum amount of food service training hours for staff in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. 4 hours. B. 8 hours. C. 12 hours. D. 16 hours. Answer C. 12 hours. In Minnesota, staff involved in food service in assisted living facilities must receive a minimum of 12 hours of food service training to ensure safe and proper food handling practices. What is the required minimum amount of hot water temperature in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. 100 degrees Fahrenheit. B. 110 degrees Fahrenheit. C. 120 degrees Fahrenheit. D. 130 degrees Fahrenheit. Answer C. 120 degrees Fahrenheit. In Minnesota, the minimum required hot water temperature in an assisted living facility is 120 degrees Fahrenheit to prevent scalding and ensure resident safety. What is the maximum allowable time for conducting background studies on prospective employees in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. 5 business days. B. 10 business days. C. 15 business days. D. 20 business days. Answer A. 5 business days. In Minnesota, background studies on prospective employees in assisted living facilities must be completed within a maximum allowable time of 5 business days. What is the required frequency of staff training in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. Annually. B. Biennially. C. Every 2 years. D. Every 3 years. Answer A. Annually. In Minnesota, staff in assisted living facilities are required to receive training annually to ensure they are knowledgeable and skilled in providing safe and quality care to residents. What is the minimum age requirement for residents in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. 55 years. B. 60 years. C. 65 years. D. 70 years. Answer A. 55 years. In Minnesota, residents must be at least 55 years of age to be eligible for residency in an assisted living facility. What is the required minimum number of square feet of living space per resident in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. 80 square feet. B. 100 square feet. C. 120 square feet. D. 150 square feet. Answer B. 100 square feet. In Minnesota, assisted living facilities are required to provide a minimum of 100 square feet of living space per resident to ensure their comfort and well-being. What is the required frequency of fire drills in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. Monthly. B. Quarterly. C. Semi-annually. D. Annually. Answer D. Annually. In Minnesota, assisted living facilities must conduct fire drills at least once a year to ensure staff and residents are prepared in case of a fire emergency. What is the required ratio of staff to residents during waking hours in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. 1:5. B. 1:7. C. 1:10. D. 1:15. Answer B. 1:7. In Minnesota, assisted living facilities are required to maintain a staff-to-resident ratio of at least 1:7 during waking hours to ensure adequate care and supervision for residents. What is the required frequency of medication administration training for unlicensed staff in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. Annually. B. Biennially. C. Every 2 years. D. Every 3 years. Answer A. Annually. In Minnesota, unlicensed staff responsible for medication administration in assisted living facilities must receive training annually to ensure safe and proper medication management practices. What is the required temperature range for hot food served in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. 135 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. B. 140 to 145 degrees Fahrenheit. C. 145 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit. D. 150 to 155 degrees Fahrenheit. Answer C. 145 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit. In Minnesota, hot food served in assisted living facilities must be maintained at a temperature range of 145 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit to ensure food safety and prevent the risk of foodborne illnesses. What is the required minimum number of days for retention of resident records in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. 1 year. B. 2 years. C. 3 years. D. 5 years. Answer C. 3 years. In Minnesota, assisted living facilities are required to retain resident records for a minimum of 3 years for documentation and regulatory compliance purposes. What is the required frequency of resident care conferences in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. Monthly. B. Quarterly. C. Semi-annually. D. Annually. Answer B. Quarterly. In Minnesota, assisted living facilities are required to conduct resident care conferences at least quarterly to review and update residents' care plans and ensure their individual needs are being met. Here are 20 sample practice exam questions with answers on the use of cameras for the Minnesota State Examination for Licensed Assisted Living Director. What is the primary purpose of using cameras in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. To monitor staff performance. B. To ensure resident privacy. C. To prevent theft. D. To detect potential abuse or neglect. Answer: D. To detect potential abuse or neglect. The primary purpose of using cameras in an assisted living facility in Minnesota is to detect potential abuse or neglect of residents and ensure their safety and well-being. What is the required notification process for residents and staff regarding the use of cameras in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. No notification required. B. Written notification to residents and staff. C. Verbal notification to residents only. D. Verbal notification to staff only. Answer: B. Written notification to residents and staff. In Minnesota, assisted living facilities are required to provide written notification to residents and staff regarding the use of cameras in the facility. What is the minimum age requirement for residents to provide consent for being recorded by cameras in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. 55 years. B. 60 years. C. 65 years. D. 70 years. Answer: C. 65 years. In Minnesota, residents must be at least 65 years of age to provide consent for being recorded by cameras in an assisted living facility. Can cameras be installed in private resident rooms in an assisted living facility in Minnesota without consent? A. Yes, as long as the facility notifies the resident. B. No, consent is required from the resident. C. Yes, with consent from the resident's family. D. No, consent is required from the resident's family. Answer: B. No, consent is required from the resident. In Minnesota, cameras cannot be installed in private resident rooms in an assisted living facility without consent from the resident. What is the required retention period for recorded video footage in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. 7 days. B. 14 days. C. 30 days. D. 90 days. Answer: C. 30 days. In Minnesota, recorded video footage from cameras in an assisted living facility must be retained for a minimum of 30 days. Can cameras be installed in bathrooms, showers, or other private areas in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. Yes, as long as the facility notifies the resident. B. No, consent is required from the resident. C. Yes, with consent from the resident's family. D. No, consent is required from the resident's family. Answer: D. No, consent is required from the resident's family. In Minnesota, cameras cannot be installed in bathrooms, showers, or other private areas in an assisted living facility without consent from the resident's family. Can cameras be used for audio recording in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. Yes, with written consent from residents and staff. B. No, audio recording is not allowed. C. Yes, with verbal consent from residents only. D. No, consent is not required for audio recording. Answer: A. Yes, with written consent from residents and staff. In Minnesota, audio recording with cameras in an assisted living facility is allowed only with written consent from residents and staff. Can cameras be used to monitor staff performance in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. Yes, without any notification to staff. B. Yes, with verbal notification to staff only. C. No, consent is required from staff. D. No, monitoring staff performance is not allowed. Answer: C. No, consent is required from staff. In Minnesota, cameras cannot be used to monitor staff performance in an assisted living facility without consent from the staff. Can cameras be used to record conversations between residents in common areas of an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. Yes, without any notification to residents. B. Yes, with verbal notification to residents only. C. No, consent is required from residents. D. No, recording conversations is not allowed. Answer C. No, consent is required from residents. In Minnesota, recording conversations between residents in common areas of an assisted living facility with cameras requires consent from the residents. What is the process for accessing and viewing recorded video footage from cameras in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. Only the facility administrator can access and view the footage. B. Only law enforcement can access and view the footage. C. Authorized personnel can access and view the footage. D. Anyone in the facility can access and view the footage. Answer is C. Authorized personnel can access and view the footage. In Minnesota, only authorized personnel, such as facility staff or law enforcement, are allowed to access and view recorded video footage from cameras in an assisted living facility. What should be the placement of cameras in an assisted living facility in Minnesota to comply with regulations? A. Cameras must be placed in all common areas. B. Cameras must be placed in resident rooms only. C. Cameras must be placed in staff-only areas. D. Cameras must be placed in areas where resident privacy is protected. Answer D. Cameras must be placed in areas where resident privacy is protected. In Minnesota, cameras in an assisted living facility must be placed in areas where resident privacy is protected, such as common areas, hallways, and entrances, but not in private resident rooms or bathrooms. Can the video footage from cameras be used for training purposes in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. Yes, without any notification to residents and staff. B. Yes, with verbal notification to residents and staff only. C. No, consent is required from residents and staff. D. No, video footage cannot be used for training purposes. Answer is C. No, consent is required from residents and staff. In Minnesota, the use of video footage from cameras for training purposes in an assisted living facility requires consent from residents and staff. What is the process for handling and storing recorded video footage from cameras in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. The facility can handle and store the footage as they see fit. B. The facility must follow specific guidelines for handling and storing the footage. C. The footage must be deleted after 24 hours. D. The footage must be provided to residents upon request. Answer B. The facility must follow specific guidelines for handling and storing the footage. In Minnesota, assisted living facilities must follow specific guidelines for handling and storing recorded video footage from cameras to ensure resident privacy and data security. Can cameras be used to monitor visitors in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. Yes, without any notification to visitors. B. Yes, with verbal notification to visitors only. C. No, consent is required from visitors. D. No, monitoring visitors is not allowed. Answer C. No, consent is required from visitors. In Minnesota, cameras cannot be used to monitor visitors in an assisted living facility without consent from the visitors. Can cameras be used for remote monitoring in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. Yes, without any notification to residents and staff. B. Yes, with verbal notification to residents and staff only. C. No, consent is required from residents and staff. D. No, remote monitoring is not allowed. Answer B. Yes, with verbal notification to residents and staff only. In Minnesota, cameras can be used for remote monitoring in an assisted living facility, but verbal notification must be given to residents and staff. Can cameras be used in resident rooms for monitoring in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. Yes, without any notification to residents. B. Yes, with written notification to residents only. C. No, consent is required from residents. D. No, cameras are not allowed in resident rooms. Answer C. No, consent is required from residents. In Minnesota, cameras cannot be used in resident rooms for monitoring in an assisted living facility without consent from the residents. What should be included in the notification to residents and staff about the use of cameras in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. The location of cameras only. B. The purpose of camera usage only. C. Both the location and purpose of camera usage. D. No notification is required. Answer is C. Both the location and purpose of camera usage. In Minnesota, notification to residents and staff about the use of cameras in an assisted living facility must include both the location and purpose of camera usage. Can cameras be used to monitor staff in private areas of an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. Yes, without any notification to staff. B. Yes, with written notification to staff only. C. No, consent is required from staff. D. No, cameras cannot be used to monitor staff. Answer C. No, consent is required from staff. In Minnesota, cameras cannot be used to monitor staff in private areas of an assisted living facility without consent from the staff. Can residents request to turn off cameras in their rooms in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. Yes, at any time and for any reason. B. Yes, with proper documentation and justification. C. No, residents cannot request to turn off cameras. D. No, cameras cannot be turned off by residents. Answer A. Yes, at any time and for any reason. In Minnesota, residents have the right to request to turn off cameras in their rooms in an assisted living facility at any time and for any reason. Can recorded video footage from cameras be used in legal proceedings in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. Yes, without any restrictions. B. Yes, with consent from residents and staff. C. No, recorded footage cannot be used in legal proceedings. D. No, only law enforcement can use recorded footage in legal proceedings. Answer B. Yes, with consent from residents and staff. In Minnesota, recorded video footage from cameras in an assisted living facility can be used in legal proceedings with consent from residents and staff. Here are 20 sample practice exam questions with answers on pre-termination and eviction for the Minnesota State Examination for Licensed Assisted Living Director. What is the first step that an assisted living facility in Minnesota must take before initiating a pre-termination or eviction process for a resident? A. Provide a written notice to the resident. B. Consult with legal counsel. C. Notify the resident's family or legal representative. D. Obtain consent from the facility's administrator. Answer A. Provide a written notice to the resident. In Minnesota, an assisted living facility must provide a written notice to the resident before initiating a pre-termination or eviction process. How many days' notice is typically required for a pre-termination or eviction notice in Minnesota? A. 7 days. B. 14 days. C. 30 days. D. 60 days. Answer C. 30 days. In Minnesota, a pre-termination or eviction notice typically requires a 30-day written notice to the resident, unless it's an emergency situation. What is considered a valid reason for pre-termination or eviction in Minnesota? A. The resident's inability to pay for services. B. The resident's refusal to comply with facility policies. C. The resident's disruptive behavior that poses a threat to others. D. All of the above. Answer D. All of the above. In Minnesota, valid reasons for pre-termination or eviction may include the resident's inability to pay for services, refusal to comply with facility policies, or disruptive behavior that poses a threat to others. Can an assisted living facility in Minnesota evict a resident for non-payment of services without giving any notice? A. Yes, if the resident is more than 30 days behind on payments. B. Yes, if the resident has a history of non-payment. C. No, written notice is always required for non-payment. D. No, eviction is not allowed for non-payment. Answer is C. No, written notice is always required for non-payment. In Minnesota, written notice is always required for eviction due to non-payment of services, regardless of the circumstances. What is the process for a resident to appeal a pre-termination or eviction in Minnesota? A. Submit a written request to the facility's administrator. B. File a complaint with the Minnesota Department of Health. C. Attend a formal hearing with a hearing officer. D. All of the above. Answer, D. All of the above. In Minnesota, a resident has the right to appeal a pre-termination or eviction by submitting a written request to the facility's administrator, filing a complaint with the Minnesota Department of Health, and attending a formal hearing with a hearing officer if necessary. How long does a resident have to request a hearing to appeal a pre-termination or eviction in Minnesota? A. 5 days. B. 10 days. C. 15 days. D. 20 days. Answer, B. 10 days. In Minnesota, a resident has 10 days from the date of the notice of pre-termination or eviction to request a hearing to appeal the decision. Can an assisted living facility in Minnesota terminate a resident's tenancy without notice if the resident poses an imminent threat to the health or safety of others? A. Yes, if the resident is a danger to others. B. Yes, if the resident has a history of violent behavior. C. No, written notice is always required. D. And no, termination is not allowed for imminent threats. Answer, A. Yes, if the resident is a danger to others. In Minnesota, an assisted living facility may terminate a resident's tenancy without notice if the resident poses an imminent threat to the health or safety of others. This can include situations where the resident's behavior presents a clear and immediate danger to other residents, staff, or visitors. Can an assisted living facility in Minnesota evict a resident for a non-renewal of lease agreement? A. Yes, with written notice of non-renewal. B. Yes, with verbal notice of non-renewal. C. No, non-renewal is not a valid reason for eviction. D. No, written notice is always required for eviction. Answer, A. Yes, with written notice of non-renewal. In Minnesota, an assisted living facility can evict a resident for non-renewal of lease agreement, but written notice of non-renewal must be provided to the resident in advance, as per state regulations. What should an assisted living facility in Minnesota do if a resident requests an extension of time to move out after receiving a notice of eviction? A. Grant the request without any changes to the eviction process. B. Deny the request and proceed with the eviction process. C. Modify the eviction process as needed to accommodate the request. D. Refer the request to legal counsel for further action. Answer is C. Modify the eviction process as needed to accommodate the request. In Minnesota, if a resident requests an extension of time to move out after receiving a notice of eviction, the assisted living facility should work with the resident and their legal representative, if applicable, to modify the eviction process as needed to accommodate the request and ensure compliance with state regulations. What documentation should an assisted living facility in Minnesota keep regarding the pre-termination or eviction process? A. Written notice provided to the resident. B. Correspondence with legal counsel, if applicable. C. Documentation of any appeals or hearings. D. All of the above. Answer, D. All of the above. In Minnesota, an assisted living facility should keep documentation of the written notice provided to the resident, correspondence with legal counsel, if applicable, and documentation of any appeals or hearings related to the pre-termination or eviction process. Can an assisted living facility in Minnesota terminate a resident's tenancy for complaining about the quality of care or services provided? A. Yes, if the complaints are found to be unfounded. B. Yes, if the complaints are persistent and disruptive. C. No, termination is not allowed for complaints about care or services D. No, termination is not allowed for any reason. Answer C. No, termination is not allowed for complaints about care or services. In Minnesota, an assisted living facility cannot terminate a resident's tenancy solely based on complaints about the quality of care or services provided, as residents have the right to voice their concerns and provide feedback without fear of retaliation. How should an assisted living facility in Minnesota handle a situation where a resident is facing eviction due to non-payment and claims of financial hardship? A. Offer a payment plan to the resident. B. Refer the resident to community resources for financial assistance. C. Work with the resident to explore other payment options. D. All of the above. Answer D. All of the above. In Minnesota, if a resident is facing eviction due to non-payment and claims financial hardship, the assisted living facility should offer a payment plan to the resident, refer them to community resources for financial assistance, and work with the resident to explore other payment options as appropriate. What is the maximum amount of time an assisted living facility in Minnesota can take to complete an eviction process once it has been initiated? A. 7 days. B. 14 days. C. 30 days. D. 60 days. Answer C. 30 days. In Minnesota, once an eviction process has been initiated, the assisted living facility has a maximum of 30 days to complete the process, as per state regulations. What is the required method of delivering a notice of eviction to a resident in Minnesota? A. Verbal notification. B. Written notification. C. Email notification. D. Text message notification. Answer B. Written notification. In Minnesota, a notice of eviction must be delivered to the resident in writing, as per state regulations. Verbal, email, or text message notifications are not considered valid methods of delivering a notice of eviction. Can an assisted living facility in Minnesota evict a resident without providing a reason for the eviction? A. Yes, as long as the resident has violated facility rules. B. Yes, if the resident has not paid rent. C. No, a valid reason must be provided for eviction. D. No, eviction is not allowed under any circumstances. Answer C. No, a valid reason must be provided for eviction. In Minnesota, an assisted living facility cannot evict a resident without providing a valid reason for the eviction, even if the resident has violated facility rules or has not paid rent. What is the first step an assisted living facility in Minnesota should take when considering pre-termination or eviction of a resident? A. Notify the resident in writing of the intent to terminate or evict. B. Hold a meeting with the resident to discuss the issue. C. Contact legal counsel for advice and guidance. D. Inform other residents and staff of the situation. Answer A. Notify the resident in writing of the intent to terminate or evict. In Minnesota, the first step an assisted living facility should take when considering pre-termination or eviction of a resident is to provide written notice to the resident of the intent to terminate or evict, as per state regulations. Can an assisted living facility in Minnesota evict a resident based on their sexual orientation, gender identity, or any other protected characteristic? A. Yes, if it is deemed disruptive to the facility's operations. B. Yes, if it is deemed in the best interest of the resident. C. No, eviction based on protected characteristics is prohibited. D. No, eviction is not allowed under any circumstances. Answer C. No, eviction based on protected characteristics is prohibited. In Minnesota, an assisted living facility cannot evict a resident based on their sexual orientation, gender identity, or any other protected characteristic, as it is prohibited by state and federal fair housing laws. Can an assisted living facility in Minnesota terminate a resident's tenancy without notice in case of an emergency situation? A. Yes, if it poses a risk to the health or safety of others. B. Yes, if it poses a risk to the facility's reputation. C. No, notice is always required for termination. D. No, termination is not allowed under any circumstances. Answer A. Yes, if it poses a risk to the health or safety of others. In Minnesota, an assisted living facility can terminate a resident's tenancy without notice in case of an emergency situation where the resident poses a risk to the health or safety of others, as per state regulations. What is the required notice period for terminating the tenancy of a resident in Minnesota for reasons other than eviction? A. 7 days. B. 14 days. C. 30 days. D. 60 days. Answer C. 30 days. In Minnesota, if an assisted living facility wishes to terminate the tenancy of a resident for reasons other than eviction, a written notice of termination must be provided to the resident at least 30 days prior to the termination date, as per state regulations. What should an assisted living facility in Minnesota do if a resident refuses to vacate the premises after receiving a notice of eviction? A. Initiate legal action for eviction. B. Lock the resident out of their unit. C. Hire security personnel to physically remove the resident. D. Withhold services and amenities until the resident leaves. Answer A. Initiate legal action for eviction. In Minnesota, an assisted living facility must follow legal procedures to evict a resident who refuses to vacate the premises after receiving a notice of eviction. This typically involves initiating legal action through the appropriate court to obtain an eviction order, as per state regulations. Which of the following is an appropriate task for an unlicensed staff member to perform in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. Administering medication. B. Conducting resident assessments. C. Developing care plans. D. Assisting with activities of daily living. Answer D. Assisting with activities of daily living. Unlicensed staff members in Minnesota assisted living facilities may assist residents with activities of daily living, such as bathing, dressing, grooming, and mobility, under the delegation and supervision of a licensed nurse or other qualified healthcare professional. Who is responsible for ensuring that delegated tasks are performed safely and effectively in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. The licensed nurse who delegated the task. B. The unlicensed staff member who is performing the task. C. The resident's family member or representative. D. The facility administrator. Answer A. The licensed nurse who delegated the task. In Minnesota, the licensed nurse who delegates a task to an unlicensed staff member is responsible for ensuring that the task is performed safely and effectively, and for providing appropriate supervision and follow-up as needed. Which of the following tasks cannot be delegated to unlicensed staff members in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. Administering oral medications. B. Assisting with transferring and ambulation. C. Performing wound care. D. Assisting with feeding via a gastrostomy tube. Answer A. Administering oral medications. In Minnesota, only licensed nurses can administer medications, including oral medications, in assisted living facilities. All other tasks listed, assisting with transferring and ambulation, performing wound care, and assisting with feeding via a gastrostomy tube, can be delegated to unlicensed staff members under appropriate supervision and training. What is the role of the licensed assisted living director in task delegation in Minnesota? A. Directly perform all tasks that require nursing skills. B. Delegate tasks to unlicensed staff members without supervision. C. Provide initial training and ongoing supervision for delegated tasks. D. Delegate tasks only to licensed nurses. Answer C. Provide initial training and ongoing supervision for delegated tasks. The licensed assisted living director in Minnesota is responsible for ensuring that appropriate initial training and ongoing supervision is provided to unlicensed staff members who are delegated tasks. The director is also responsible for overseeing the overall process of task delegation and ensuring compliance with state regulations. What should the licensed assisted living director do if an unlicensed staff member is not competent to perform a delegated task in Minnesota? A. Allow the staff member to continue performing the task with additional supervision. B. Reassign the staff member to a different task. C. Terminate the staff member's employment. D. Provide additional training and supervision to improve competence. Answer: B. Reassign the staff member to a different task. If an unlicensed staff member is not competent to perform a delegated task in Minnesota, the licensed assisted living director should reassign the staff member to a different task that is within their competency level. Additional training and supervision may also be provided to improve the staff member's competence, but the staff member should not continue performing the task until they are deemed competent. What is the responsibility of a licensed assisted living director in Minnesota regarding medication management? A. Administering medications to residents. B. Supervising unlicensed staff members in administering medications. C. Providing medication counseling to residents. D. Managing the medication inventory and storage. Answer: D. Managing the medication inventory and storage. The licensed assisted living director in Minnesota is responsible for overseeing the management of the medication inventory, including storage, documentation, and disposal, in accordance with state regulations and facility policies. The director may delegate the administration of medications to licensed nurses or other qualified healthcare professionals. Which of the following is an example of a controlled substance in Minnesota's medication regulations? A. Acetaminophen, Tylenol. B. Diphenhydramine, Benadryl. C. Hydrochlorothiazide, HCTZ. D. Oxycodone, OxyContin. Answer: D. Oxycodone, OxyContin. Oxycodone is a controlled substance in Minnesota and requires strict adherence to state regulations for storage, documentation, and administration. Acetaminophen, diphenhydramine, and hydrochlorothiazide are not controlled substances and are not subject to the same regulatory requirements. How often should medication administration records be reviewed in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. Monthly. B. Quarterly. C. Annually. D. As needed. Answer: A. Monthly. Medication administration records should be reviewed by a licensed nurse or other qualified healthcare professional at least once a month in Minnesota to ensure that medications are being administered as prescribed, documentation is complete and accurate, and any discrepancies or errors are addressed in a timely manner. What should be documented when a resident refuses to take a prescribed medication in Minnesota? A. The resident's refusal and reason for refusal. B. The medication withheld and reason for withholding. C. The staff member who attempted to administer the medication. D. All of the above. Answer: D. All of the above. When a resident refuses to take a prescribed medication in Minnesota, the resident's refusal and reason for refusal should be documented, along with the medication withheld and reason for withholding, and the staff member who attempted to administer the medication. This documentation is important for ensuring resident safety, communication among staff members, and compliance with state regulations. How should expired or discontinued medications be disposed of in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. Flushing down the toilet. B. Throwing in the regular trash. C. Returning to the pharmacy. D. Placing in a designated medication waste container. Answer: D. Placing in a designated medication waste container. Expired or discontinued medications should be properly disposed of in a designated medication waste container in Minnesota, in accordance with state regulations and facility policies. Flushing down the toilet, throwing in the regular trash, or returning to the pharmacy are not appropriate methods of medication disposal in an assisted living facility. What is the purpose of a care plan in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. To outline the facility's policies and procedures. B. To document a resident's medical history. C. To establish goals and interventions for resident care. D. To ensure compliance with state regulations. Answer is C. To establish goals and interventions for resident care. Care plans in assisted living facilities in Minnesota are developed to identify the unique needs, preferences, and goals of each resident and outline the interventions and strategies to meet those needs. Care plans are dynamic documents that are regularly reviewed, updated, and shared with the resident, family, and care team to ensure coordinated and person-centered care. Who is responsible for developing and overseeing the implementation of care plans in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. Licensed nurses only. B. Licensed assisted living director. C. Certified nursing assistants, CNAs. D. Family members of residents. Answer: B. Licensed assisted living director. The licensed assisted living director in Minnesota is responsible for overseeing the development and implementation of care plans for residents. While licensed nurses may contribute to the care plan process, the ultimate responsibility lies with the licensed assisted living director to ensure that care plans are comprehensive, person-centered, and updated as needed. How often should care plans be reviewed in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. Annually. B. Quarterly. C. Monthly. D. As needed. Answer: B. Quarterly. Care plans in assisted living facilities in Minnesota should be reviewed at least quarterly, or more frequently if there is a change in the resident's condition or care needs. Regular care plan reviews ensure that the care plan remains current and effective in addressing the resident's changing needs and goals. What information should be included in a resident's care plan in Minnesota? A. Resident's age and gender. B. A resident's medical diagnosis. C. Resident's dietary preferences. D. Resident's emergency contact information. Answer: C. Resident's dietary preferences. Care plans in Minnesota should include the resident's dietary preferences and restrictions, as well as any special considerations related to the resident's food and fluid intake. This information helps ensure that the resident's nutritional needs and preferences are met as part of their overall care plan. What is the purpose of involving the resident and their family in the care plan process in Minnesota? A. To comply with state regulations. B. To promote resident autonomy and person-centered care. C. To ensure accurate documentation. D. To avoid legal liabilities. Answer: B. To promote resident autonomy and person-centered care. Involving the resident and their family in the care plan process in Minnesota is essential to promote resident autonomy, dignity, and person-centered care. It helps ensure that the resident's unique needs, preferences, and goals are incorporated into their care plan, and fosters open communication and collaboration among the resident, family, and care team. According to Minnesota regulations, what is the minimum number of meals that must be provided to residents in an assisted living facility in a 24-hour period? A. 2. B. 3. C. 4. D. 5. Answer: B. 3. Minnesota regulations require that residents in assisted living facilities must be provided with at least 3 nutritionally balanced meals in a 24-hour period, unless a resident's physician orders a different meal pattern based on the resident's medical condition or dietary restrictions. What type of dining services are typically required in Minnesota assisted living facilities? A. Formal sit-down dining with waitstaff. B. Buffet-style dining. C. Family-style dining. D. Self-serve dining. Answer: C. Family-style dining. Family-style dining, where residents are served meals in a communal dining area with opportunities for socialization and interaction, is often the preferred approach in Minnesota assisted living facilities. This promotes a sense of community and encourages social engagement among residents. How should special dietary needs of residents be addressed in Minnesota assisted living facilities? A. Residents with special dietary needs should bring their own food. B. Special dietary needs should be documented in the care plan. C. Special dietary needs are not allowed in assisted living facilities. D. Special dietary needs are not relevant in assisted living facilities. Answer: B. Special dietary needs should be documented in the care plan. In Minnesota assisted living facilities, residents with special dietary needs, such as allergies, religious or cultural restrictions, or medical conditions, should have their dietary needs documented in their care plan. This ensures that their dietary requirements are met and appropriate meals are provided. How should food storage and handling be managed in Minnesota assisted living facilities? Food storage and handling are not regulated in assisted living facilities. B. Food should be stored and handled according to industry standards. C. Food should be stored and handled according to resident preferences. D. Food storage and handling are the responsibility of the residents. Answer: B. Food should be stored and handled according to industry standards. In Minnesota assisted living facilities, food storage and handling should follow industry standards and best practices for food safety. This includes proper temperature control, food handling hygiene, and storage to prevent foodborne illnesses and ensure food safety for residents. What is the role of the assisted living director in managing meals and dining services in Minnesota assisted living facilities? A. Meal planning and preparation. B. Food service staffing. C. Menu development. D. All of the above. Answer: D. All of the above. The licensed assisted living director in Minnesota is responsible for overseeing and managing meals and dining services in the facility, which may include meal planning and preparation, food service staffing, menu development, and ensuring compliance with regulations related to meals and dining services. Note: meals and dining services play a crucial role in the overall well-being and quality of life of residents in assisted living facilities. Familiarizing oneself with the regulations, best practices, and responsibilities related to meals and dining services in Minnesota is important for successfully passing the licensed assisted living director examination. What is the minimum required staff training hours per year for direct care staff in Minnesota assisted living facilities? A. 4 hours. B. 8 hours. C. 12 hours. D. 16 hours. Answer: C. 12 hours. According to Minnesota regulations, direct care staff in assisted living facilities must receive a minimum of 12 hours of staff training annually, which may include topics such as resident rights, emergency preparedness, infection control, and medication management. What is the responsibility of the assisted living director in staff training in Minnesota assisted living facilities? A. Conducting all staff training personally. B. Hiring external trainers for staff training. C. Overseeing and managing staff training programs. D. Not responsible for staff training. Answer: C. Overseeing and managing staff training programs. The assisted living director in Minnesota is responsible for overseeing and managing staff training programs in the facility. This may include coordinating training sessions, ensuring compliance with regulations, tracking staff training hours, and evaluating the effectiveness of the training programs. Which of the following topics must be covered in the initial orientation for new staff in Minnesota assisted living facilities? A. Resident rights. B. Emergency preparedness. C. Infection control. D. All of the above. Answer: D. All of the above. Minnesota regulations require that the initial orientation for new staff in assisted living facilities must cover topics such as resident rights, emergency preparedness, infection control, and other relevant areas to ensure that staff are well prepared to provide quality care to residents. How often must staff receive training on emergency preparedness in Minnesota assisted living facilities? A. Once a year. B. Every 2 years. C. Every 3 years. D. Every 5 years. Answer: A. Once a year. Minnesota regulations require that staff receive training on emergency preparedness at least once a year. This may include topics such as evacuation procedures, disaster response, and emergency communication protocols. What documentation is typically required for staff training in Minnesota assisted living facilities? A. Training logs. B. Certificates of completion. C. Staff signatures. D. All of the above. Answer: D. All of the above. Documentation of staff training is important in Minnesota assisted living facilities to demonstrate compliance with regulations. This may include maintaining training logs, collecting certificates of completion, and obtaining staff signatures as evidence of completed training. Note: staff training is critical in ensuring that the staff members in assisted living facilities are knowledgeable, skilled, and capable of providing safe and quality care to residents. Understanding the requirements, responsibilities, and documentation related to staff training in Minnesota is essential for passing the Licensed Assisted Living Director examination. What is the role of the ombudsman in Minnesota assisted living facilities? A. To provide medical care to residents. B. To manage the facility's finances. C. To investigate and resolve resident complaints. D. To oversee staff training programs. Answer is C. To investigate and resolve resident complaints. The Ombudsman in Minnesota is responsible for receiving, investigating, and resolving complaints made by residents of assisted living facilities. They act as an advocate for residents and work to ensure their rights are protected. What is the purpose of the Ombudsman program in Minnesota assisted living facilities? A. To monitor compliance with regulations. B. To oversee facility operations. C. To provide legal advice to residents. D. To manage resident finances. Answer: A. To monitor compliance with regulations. The Ombudsman program in Minnesota is designed to monitor and promote compliance with regulations in assisted living facilities. They work to ensure that residents are treated with dignity and respect, and that their rights are upheld. What type of issues can the Ombudsman help residents within Minnesota assisted living facilities? A. Billing disputes with the facility. B. Quality of care concerns. C. Disagreements with other residents. D. All of the above. Answer: D. All of the above. The Ombudsman in Minnesota can help residents with a variety of issues, including billing disputes with the facility, quality of care concerns, disagreements with other residents, and other issues related to their well-being and rights. How can residents in Minnesota assisted living facilities contact the Ombudsman? A. Through the facility's management. B. By sending a written letter. C. By phone or in person. D. Through a social worker. Answer is C. By phone or in person. Residents in Minnesota assisted living facilities can contact the Ombudsman by phone or in person. The contact information for the Ombudsman program is typically provided to residents upon admission to the facility. What is the role of the Assisted Living Director in relation to the Ombudsman program in Minnesota? A. To prevent residents from contacting the Ombudsman. B. To cooperate and assist with Ombudsman investigations. C. To ignore Ombudsman inquiries. D. To file complaints against the Ombudsman. Answer: B. To cooperate and assist with Ombudsman investigations. The Assisted Living Director in Minnesota is expected to cooperate and assist with Ombudsman investigations when requested. This includes providing information, access to records, and other necessary support to facilitate the resolution of resident complaints. What are some examples of services that may be provided in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. Assistance with activities of daily living, ADLs. B. Medication management. C. Meal preparation and dining services. D. Social and recreational activities. E. All of the above. Answer: E. All of the above. Assisted living facilities in Minnesota may provide a range of services, including assistance with activities of daily living, ADLs, medication management, meal preparation and dining services, as well as social and recreational activities to promote the well-being of residents. How should the needs and preferences of residents be assessed when providing services in an assisted living facility? A. Through a standardized assessment tool. B. By observing the resident's behavior. C. Through discussions with the resident and their family. D. All of the above. Answer: D. All of the above. The needs and preferences of residents in an assisted living facility should be assessed using a combination of methods, including standardized assessment tools, observation of the resident's behavior, and discussions with the resident and their family. This helps to ensure that services are tailored to the individual needs and preferences of each resident. What is the role of the licensed assisted living director in coordinating services for residents in Minnesota? A. To provide all services directly to residents. B. To oversee the provision of services by staff. C. To delegate all services to other staff members. D. To ensure that services are only provided by outside contractors. Answer: B. To oversee the provision of services by staff. The licensed assisted living director in Minnesota is responsible for overseeing the provision of services to residents by staff members. This includes coordinating, supervising, and ensuring that services are provided according to the facility's policies and procedures, and in compliance with state regulations. How often should care plans be reviewed and updated for residents in Minnesota assisted living facilities? A. Annually. B. Every 6 months. C. Monthly. D. As needed, based on changes in the resident's condition or preferences. Answer: D. As needed, based on changes in the resident's condition or preferences. Care plans for residents in Minnesota assisted living facilities should be reviewed and updated as needed, based on changes in the resident's condition or preferences. This helps to ensure that services are tailored to the changing needs of the resident and that their preferences are respected. What is the role of staff training in providing quality services in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. To meet regulatory requirements. B. To ensure staff can perform their assigned tasks. C. To promote resident safety and well-being. D. All of the above. Answer: D. All of the above. Staff training is critical in providing quality services in an assisted living facility in Minnesota. It helps staff meet regulatory requirements, ensures that they are competent in performing their assigned tasks, and promotes resident safety and well-being. What should the licensed assisted living director do if a resident or their representative makes a complaint about a concern or issue in the facility? A. Ignore the complaint as it is not within the director's scope of responsibilities. B. Document the complaint and take appropriate action to address it. C. Dismiss the complaint as invalid without investigation. D. Refer the complaint to another staff member or department. Answer: B. Document the complaint and take appropriate action to address it. As the licensed assisted living director, it is important to document any complaints made by residents or their representatives and take appropriate action to address the concerns. This may involve investigating the complaint, resolving the issue, and communicating the outcome to the complainant. What is the timeline for responding to complaints in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. Within 24 hours. B. Within 48 hours. C. Within 72 hours. D. Within 7 business days. Answer is C. Within 72 hours. In Minnesota, assisted living facilities are required to respond to complaints within 72 hours. This may involve acknowledging the complaint, conducting an investigation, and taking appropriate action to address the concerns in a timely manner. What should the licensed assisted living director do if a complaint involves an allegation of abuse, neglect, or exploitation of a resident? A. Report the allegation to the local authorities. B. Keep the complaint confidential and take no action. C. Conduct an internal investigation without involving outside agencies. D. Deny the allegation and dismiss the complaint. Answer: A. Report the allegation to the local authorities. If a complaint involves an allegation of abuse, neglect, or exploitation of a resident, the licensed assisted living director is required to report it to the local authorities, such as Adult Protective Services or law enforcement, as per Minnesota state regulations. Keeping the complaint confidential, conducting an internal investigation without involving outside agencies, or denying the allegation and dismissing the complaint are not appropriate actions in such cases. What should the licensed assisted living director do if a resident or their representative is dissatisfied with the resolution of a complaint? A. Ignore their dissatisfaction as it is their personal opinion. B. Provide them with additional information on the facility's policies and procedures. C. Dismiss their dissatisfaction as unfounded. D. Refer them to another assisted living facility. Answer B. Provide them with additional information on the facility's policies and procedures. If a resident or their representative is dissatisfied with the resolution of a complaint, the licensed assisted living director should provide them with additional information on the facility's policies and procedures, and try to address any remaining concerns or questions. Ignoring their dissatisfaction, dismissing it as unfounded, or referring them to another facility are not appropriate actions to take. What should the licensed assisted living director do to prevent complaints in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. Avoid communicating with residents and their representatives. B. Maintain open and transparent communication with residents and their representatives. C. Disregard resident preferences and choices. D. Minimize staff interactions with residents. Answer B. Maintain open and transparent communication with residents and their representatives. To prevent complaints in an assisted living facility in Minnesota, the licensed assisted living director should maintain open and transparent communication with residents and their representatives. This includes actively listening to their concerns, addressing any issues in a timely manner, and promoting resident-centered care that respects their preferences and choices. Avoiding communication, disregarding resident preferences, or minimizing staff interactions are not appropriate strategies to prevent complaints. What is the recommended temperature range for the common areas of an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. 60 degrees Fahrenheit to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. B. 70 degrees Fahrenheit to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. C. 80 degrees Fahrenheit to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. D. 90 degrees Fahrenheit to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Answer A. 60 degrees Fahrenheit to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. The recommended temperature range for the common areas of an assisted living facility in Minnesota is typically between 60 degrees Fahrenheit and 70 degrees Fahrenheit to ensure the comfort and well-being of the residents. What is the ideal temperature for storing perishable food items in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. 32 degrees Fahrenheit. B. 40 degrees Fahrenheit. C. 50 degrees Fahrenheit. D. 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Answer B. 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The ideal temperature for storing perishable food items in an assisted living facility in Minnesota is typically 40 degrees Fahrenheit to prevent the growth of bacteria and ensure food safety. What should be the temperature of the hot water supplied in resident units in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. 90 degrees Fahrenheit to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. B. 100 degrees Fahrenheit to 110 degrees Fahrenheit. C. 110 degrees Fahrenheit to 120 degrees Fahrenheit. D. 120 degrees Fahrenheit to 130 degrees Fahrenheit. Answer C. 110 degrees Fahrenheit to 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The hot water supplied in resident units in an assisted living facility in Minnesota should typically be maintained at a temperature of 110 degrees Fahrenheit to 120 degrees Fahrenheit to prevent scalding, while ensuring it is warm enough for resident use. What is the recommended temperature for a resident's room in an assisted living facility in Minnesota? A. 60 degrees Fahrenheit to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. B. 70 degrees Fahrenheit to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. C. 80 degrees Fahrenheit to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. D. 90 degrees Fahrenheit to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Answer B. 70 degrees Fahrenheit to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. The recommended temperature range for a residence room in an assisted living facility in Minnesota is typically between 70 degrees Fahrenheit and 80 degrees Fahrenheit to provide a comfortable living environment for the residents. What should the licensed assisted living director do if a resident complains about the temperature in their room being too hot or too cold? A. Ignore the complaint as it is a personal preference. B. Document the complaint and take appropriate action to address it. C. Dismiss the complaint as invalid without investigation. D. Change the temperature setting as per personal preference. Answer: B. Document the complaint and take appropriate action to address it. If a resident complains about the temperature in their room being too hot or too cold, the licensed assisted living director should document the complaint and take appropriate action to address it, which may involve adjusting the thermostat, checking for any HVAC issues, or addressing any other underlying factors causing the temperature discrepancy. Ignoring the complaint, dismissing it without investigation, or changing the temperature setting based on personal preference are not appropriate actions to take. Thank you. The end.